The process of keeping track of time has been around for thousands of years. But of course, the medium has changed, especially in the last couple of thousand years, namely since 1000 AD, where we started to keep track of perpetual time in the form of clock towers, and then later into new mediums such as pocket watches, marine chronometers, and of course now wristwatches. Now, over the last 500 years, we experienced a crazy golden age in watchmaking, namely around the 17 to roughly early 1800s, where we saw some of the greatest watchmakers of all time: Abraham Louis Breguet, John Arnold, Thomas Mudge, Ferdinand Berthoud, among many, many others, who really revolutionized the entire concept of keeping track of time. But over the last 100 or so years, watches have not been as innovative as they once were. And so today I want to go over my top 5 most innovative watches of the last 20 years. My first entrant is for a very unique watch, a digital display watch. It is the Lange Sohne Zor. Now, of course, many people are familiar with this because it has become something of an icon in the watchmaking industry, not just for its time format, but its crazy concept and how they ultimately came up with this digital display format. Now, Lange itself launched the watch in 2009 with an absolute bang, launching 4 different releases, one in rose gold with a silver dial, one in white gold with a black dial, one yellow gold with a champagne dial, and then lastly capped it off with a platinum edition in a limited edition of 200 pieces with a kind of silverish gray dial. Now, these watches have all become super collectible and of course are very, very well regarded by watch collectors today because they're really unique mechanically. Right, to come up with a concept of a digital display watch is extremely difficult due to the loss in amplitude. For each time each number is flicking over, you're losing a degree of amplitude on the balance, which ultimately affects the timekeeping of the watch. Now, to regulate that, Lange Sohne came up with an ingenious concept to use a remontoir, something typically used in clock towers to manage the outflow of power to the escapement, and here they use it to change the power inherent in each numeral change. Now, this was a groundbreaking development, something that was conceptualized by Gunter Blumlein, the late great Gunter Blumlein, and ultimately put into execution by Lange Sohne. There's no question about it, coming up with this concept was something of pure genius and absolutely has to be in your top 5 or even top 10 list of most innovative watches of the last 20 years, just due to how rare a complication this is and how they were able to achieve it so seamlessly. The next watch is actually a pair of watches, 2 watches made by the incredible Stephen McDonald, who is now closely working with MB&F. For those familiar with his work, they'll know that I'm talking about the Legacy Machine Perpetual Calendar, as well as the Sequential Evo. Now, the Legacy Machine Perpetual Calendar posed the greatest advancement in a watch complication that I can think of in probably the last couple hundred years, if I had to estimate. At the end of the day, the Perpetual Calendar has been around since the 1700s, originally invented by watchmaker Thomas Mudge. Now, the Perpetual Calendar complication has looked roughly the same since its original birth, as it really just requires a specific gear ratio to manage each complication, and simply put, it's something that's been done over and over again and watch brands are pretty familiar with. Now, what Stephen McDonald tried to tackle is ultimately the loss in amplitude, but also, most importantly, the incredible dangers in regulating a perpetual calendar. Whenever the calendar switches over in that danger zone from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., you have a lot of springs that are engaged which can harm the movement and ultimately require frequent service, which is a drawback of owning a perpetual calendar movement. And so what Stephen McDonald did was implement a mechanical processor to his perpetual calendar movement, which was no longer based on a 30 or 31-day cycle, but rather a 28-day cycle in which dates would be added on through the mechanical processor to allow for instantaneous adjustment over time. So a perpetual calendar will keep track of the day, date, month, and leap year for 100 years. Now, that's super impressive, especially considering Stephen McDonald was able to make a drastic improvement to the system, which simply hadn't been done for hundreds of years. And the best part is, this is a foolproof system. Between the 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. danger zone, the mechanical system actually locks down so the user can actually change the dates. Now, his second watch was probably even more impressive, and that is the Sequential Evo. I won't get into the mechanics of it because frankly, I still don't even quite understand it, but it's incredible what he was able to achieve with this twin inverter system, allowing two chronographs to essentially work simultaneously with no loss in amplitude to the balance, where typically you're losing about 30% each time you engage the chronograph. It's just simply incredible. It's an incredible watch from concept to design to ultimately implementation, as Stephen McDonald is a true genius that is really innovative and pushing forward the boundaries of watchmaking today that we haven't seen in a very, very long time. So the MB&F Legacy Machine Perpetual Calendar and the Sequential Evo both definitely deserve a place on this list, and so this is technically a top 6, but I'll count both of them as one. Now, when playing sports, it's always recommended you take the watch off. Now, why is that? Because of the G-force impact ultimately sports can have on your watch, right? These are fine mechanical components on your wrist, and so harming it, by swinging a golf club, swinging a baseball bat, shooting a basketball, or all those kind of different activities can ultimately harm your wristwatch. Now, the first watch that could be worn to withstand that kind of G-force was a Richard Mille Nadal. Richard Mille's partnership with Raphael Nadal, the tennis player, has been nothing short of spectacular, and we saw so many innovative qualities to these wristwatches that created a number of other innovations when it came to G-force resistance in other watches from other watch brands as well. Now, the Nadal came out originally in 2010 with the RM27, and when it hit the market, there was simply nothing else like it. That suspension system, which essentially kept the movement in check and didn't allow G-force to impact it, was simply sublime. Now, this was a time to put it into context when Richard Mille was working very, very closely with a famous watchmaker and a famous watch brand, namely Renault and Papy, which is now owned by AP, AP also owning an ownership in RM. And so that AP-RP relationship still exists today, but I certainly don't think they're coming out with the kind of creation that they did back then. And this Richard Mille Nadal, again, is something to behold. Coming in at only 20 grams when it was originally released, it was the lightest watch in the world at the time, able to withstand a G-force that was simply impossible by that standard at the time. Now, of course, the Nadal lineup was followed up with even watches like the Baby Nadal, and has become arguably the most impressive and, of course, the most successful collaboration for Richard Mille watches on the market, period. They are certainly some of the best performing on the secondary market as well. Now, 1 year later in 2011, the RM38 Bubba Watson was released with similar kind of G-force withstanding capabilities, so I felt it was really important to mention it. And of course, it does stand alone as its kind of own unique interpretation of withstanding G-force within a wristwatch and capable of ultimately taking on extreme sports. But the original was the Raphael Nadal. It is my personal favorite, and so I am biased towards it. And I would say it has to make the list of top 5 most innovative watches of the last 20 years just because of that incredible complication and what it was able to achieve. Now, this next watch should come as no surprise. It is arguably the greatest wristwatch of all time, and certainly a feat of watchmaking that is uber impressive. It is the Patek Philippe Grandmaster Chime, an incredible wristwatch that is truly the pinnacle of watchmaking, and I would say the pinnacle of the most prestigious brand in the industry, namely Patek Philippe. Now, it was launched for Patek Philippe's 175th anniversary, and it was really meant to showcase the brand's watchmaking prowess, not just in terms of watchmaking, but also in all aspects, with the ornate engravings on the case, the lugs, and the sides of the case to showcase all that incredible artistry and capability that Patek Philippe has beyond watchmaking. These kind of artistic qualities are something that are almost never done in watchmaking anymore, and so I certainly appreciate it, and I love the added touch that Patek Philippe adds with that. Now, of course, the watch itself features over 20 complications and is an absolute powerhouse from Patek Philippe, a true tour de force that shows off their incredible watchmaking prowess. This is something that we've come to expect from Patek Philippe, the most prestigious brand in the industry, the one I call the king of complications, and certainly it has to be in the top 5 most innovative watches, as it's literally the most complicated wristwatch ever made with 20 complications. Now, will it be outdone? Certainly that's a possibility, but I think just the fact that this has a double-sided case, the fact that it has such ornate engravings, all those complications added into one, and it can take the crown as the first, the one to really feature this many complications. Sure, there will be watches after it that features many more complications and may be mechanically more impressive, but I think this is the one that set the standard for all the others that will come after it and that have come after it, and I think certainly is the best one to get and the most desired from the king of all watch brands, Patek Philippe. Now, this last pick is a bit of a controversial pick because it's actually the Apple Watch. Now, I remember almost a decade ago now watching an episode of Talking Watches from Hodinkee with Ben Clymer and Kevin Rose, where they talked about how the Apple Watch is the tool watch, essentially, of today's individual, where the dive watch, the Submariner, for example, was the tool watch of a diver 60-odd years ago. Now, for me, I've always been somewhat of a mechanical watch snob, self-admittedly. There's something about a mechanical watch that I just find so much more superior to a quartz watch. It has a soul, it has life, and although it doesn't have the accuracy of a quartz watch, it has the character that a quartz watch simply doesn't. And so with that being said, I was admittedly certainly a hater of the Apple Watch, but I'd be remiss if I don't recognize and appreciate just how much it's done for the watch industry. Not only has it created an entire genre of watches, namely in the form of smartwatches, which we see presently today being an expansive line from many, many brands, but also it's fundamentally changed watch collecting and just how many watch collectors there are on the market. Now, we can't measure the exact figures, but there's no doubt about it that the Apple Watch had an impact on just how many collectors, watch collectors specifically, that we see today that wouldn't have otherwise been interested in watch it had it not been for the Apple Watch. And for that reason alone, it has to make my list. Now, of course, the complications inherent in it are unbelievable and certainly are way beyond anything a mechanical watch can ever do. And so there's no doubt it's the tool watch of today. Now, sure, it doesn't have the artistic qualities of a mechanical wristwatch or a traditionally made watch, but there's no doubt about it, its innovation is packed. It certainly is a wristwatch. It's something that's worth certainly my respect and all of your respect, and has to be in the top 5 most innovative watches of the last 20 years. So guys, that's my list of the most innovative watches released over the last 20 years. I'd love to know down in the comments below, what do you think about my list? And of course, what does your list entail? And which watches are part of your most innovative watches of the last 20 years? Guys, if you enjoy this type of content, I'd really appreciate if you like the video, subscribe for more videos in the future. And of course, I'd love to hear your feedback down in the comments below of what videos you'd like to see from us in the future.